Somebody just pulled up. We got these fellas here, they're in the other class over there. They're all retired. And he goes and gets donuts and coffee and all that kind of stuff. I can't eat that stuff, see? And so, but I found us a place to eat, but it looks like, we'll be doing streaming. So, but I found this place to eat. Golden Corral is open. It's pretty good. I went over and ate tonight. Okay, we're on Unit 3, a historical survey of the Hebrew people from the beginning of the Grecian period until the rising of the Roman Empire. And when you look on your notes there, like I said a while ago, that's page 55. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I want to go down now. Now, let me see if how fast I can get down to the end. Brother Turner gave us a map many years ago, and that you can't even find that map anymore.
Oh, really?
So no, and so I have found another one, and I'm hoping there it is. It's on page 117. If you want to look at that, it's I can't put it on. If we were doing streaming at home, then we'd be able to put the PowerPoint. Did you get down there 117?
I'm moving to it right now, Bobby.
Yeah. It's the map that's in color. That's what I liked about it, and especially since I could put it on with the computer, and you can see the area that we're talking about, how that it's broken up, and we're going to talk about some of these different areas, these towns, cities, and they call these the city states. And so we'll talk about some of the names of them, but notice again, there all the different areas and the color. Got it?
Yes, sir.
The color ones are the city states, is my understanding of distribution of the Greek dialects in the classical period. And so it shows all those places. The reason why we got this one is because you go down to the right there, you see roads, and then you go all the way up. We're going to talk about Ephesus and some of these other areas all the way up through there, up to the top or left corner there. You'll have Epirus, then you have Coria, Dodon, and the other one, Thessaly, Thessali. We'll talk about that one. I did find, you can go back now to page 55. I did find a number of different ways to spell things today instead of what we have in the unit. So sometimes you may see that I have a word spelled one way in one place and some other way in another place. And what I'm trying to do with our notes that I'm sending you is that I'm typing this all up in case anybody ever teaches this class, or when someone else teaches the class. Brother Tidwell will have a copy of this work and also the stuff that I add to it, so that person will be able to also go through, make some changes and so forth. And maybe eventually we'll have a good outline to cover, because we have 10 units here, and plus we have a couple of books that we want to read things out of. This is that historical survey of the Hebrew people. And if you recall, when we first started, let me get my other book here, that when we first started, that we talked about an overview of the Jewish history. And just very quickly, we talked about the beginning, the call of Abraham around 2150 BC, and also the patriarchs then was from 2150 to 1850 BC. That would be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then we talked about the Exodus, 1450 BC, the time of the wilderness wanderings, 1450 BC to 1410 BC, the conquest of Canaan, 1410 to 1400 BC, the period of the Judges, 1400 to 1050 BC, the United Kingdom, that was when, just had one king. They call it united, but they weren't really in the strictest of the meaning of the word united. But that was 1050 and 930 BC. Then you have the divided kingdom, 930 to 722 BC. 722 BC is when the 10 tribes went off to Assyria in captivity, and never to be restored like Judah was. We had Judah alone, 722, and that carries us down to 586 BC. And so then the exile and the return begins in 586 BC to 440 BC. And so this is what we're going to be looking at. And during this time, we're going to talk about a vision of that of Nebuchadnezzar. And that is called the Persian, the overview of that of the history of the Jewish history. And so that brings us down about where we are. maybe just a little after that, but it brings us down so that we can see here what takes place, because it takes place between 536 BC and 332 BC. And so you have Persia never was able to conquer that of the Greek city states. Now, I showed you those Greek city states in that new map, in that colorful map that we have at the very end of Unit 3. And so you can go back if you want to, and I'm probably going to do this myself, is when I go back and check on the spelling and some other things in reference here to put in BC where BC ought to be put, and so that people understand that we're talking about before the coming of Christ. And some other things is that I'm going to highlight some of these places on the map and in the notes so that we will know where these places are. But they never conquered, Persia never conquered the city states. And so the Greek colonies on the shores of Asia Minor called Ioanians, Ioanians, were at one time under the Persian rule, but in time revolted and they would join with the mother country. So it's like a thing of going back and forth. You know, they would revolt and then they'd be brought under control, then they'd revolt again, and so forth. And it's like a lot of things that we've probably heard about reference to that of Israel and so forth. But we find that Darius, his status was between 521 BC and 486 BC. And then in 492 BC, he mustered a gigantic force by land and sea to subdue both the colonies in revolt and the mother country of Greece. And so we find that this is what Darius does. And he actually goes and he defeats both on the land and the sea. So we find that he had a very good navy, as we would say it, and also a very good army. He had to have all of those in order to conquer that of Greece. So Greece was taken. But a revolt in Egypt and later his death prevented Darius from prosecuting a further pursuing, that probably best word, a further war against. Now let me put pursue, P-U-R, pursue. There. Pursue, S-U-E, pursue. A further war there, pursue it, and against that of Greece. Now, notice, as I said, revolt in Egypt. And what I have noticed in that of our study, trying to study this and knowing other history, that you would recall that when Israel, say that Israel and Egypt had war, and all of a sudden they made peace among them. And so they thought things were over, and then all of a sudden the people up at, we would say, over down in Syria, all of a sudden they begin to fight. And so Egypt would join with that of Israel, or Egypt would maybe come around and say, well, we're going to join with Syria, and they would fight. So that's what they would do, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, in reference to the different countries. Now, after Darius, you have Xerxes, 483 BC, 465 BC. And Xerxes invaded Greece with more than 5 million Persians. Can you imagine that? 5 million Persians. That's a lot of people going into a place. The Persian army was opposed and defeated, though, at Thermopylae by Leonidas. And the Persian fleet was defeated by the Greeks at Salamis under the celebrated Themistocles, I think is the way you say his name, or Themistocles. So, and what you see there basically is that there was a division in reference to the war, where we go back and we see that Darius, he took on by land and sea and he won. But yet then we find when the revolt happened in reference to that of Xerxes and the Persian army there, even though it's 5 million strong, how that they were, and they were opposed and they were defeated. They're defeated by one, as we would say, commander at a place, and then also by another commander on the sea. So they had 2 wars going at one time. And so they may have been fighting together against them, but the point is that the battles, the land and the sea, they were battles, and Persia lost, Xerxes lost both battles. So Xerxes, the Persian fleet was defeated by the Greeks at Salamis under the celebrated Themistocles. And we find Xerxes returned to Persia, leaving his general, Mardonius, behind, and he fared no better. In other words, he actually left him, Xerxes did, hoping that he was going to be the one that's going to be able to get back and be in the winning column, I guess, but that did not do. They continued to lose. And one day, the Persians were defeated by land at Plataea in Bolata and by the Sea of Macau in Asia. So again, they were continuously being defeated, even though they had 5 million people to fight. So from that time on, no Persian ever invaded the Hellespont. And so the Hellespont was composed of these Greek city-states that we looked on the map, and we looked at some of them, and we're going to bring some of them up because in the Greek peninsula, broken by mountains and valleys, added a long indented coastline. And when you look at that, and it'd be good again if we had the PowerPoint where we could show all the coastline and everything, and how well that it was in reference to that they were able to be winners in reference to that of land and sea. And so the topography played a large part in the development of the Greeks. They were separated from their neighbors by the mountains. That would simply mean that go to the neighbors, they would have to cross the mountains and things of that sort, and the weather and so forth. And each community, however small it may be, became a separate political unit. And so that's the reason why they have these city-states. There's so many of them, but yet they grew and, they produced. And so therefore they each had a community, they had their own political unit. So the city, which was a center of government and trade, together with the surrounding countryside, constituted a city-state. Now that's just like us saying, so I'm from Cartersville, that we have Cartersville, and Cartersville is a city state. And so Georgia is the state. But these cities, because they were so far apart, and they operated like an independent state. They had their own political everything, just like a state would. So the coastline favored the growth of the maritime trade, especially with the Phoenicians. And so there were a lot of that in the fleets. And this sometimes is one of the things that intrigues me, is because, you and I talk about, as we go all the way back to that of the beginning and the call of Abraham and things of that sort, and where all they were. And eventually we find that, there are people, Moses goes off, and there's the, Midianites, and there's people elsewhere. They were scattered abroad at the Tower of Babel in the book of Genesis, and they scattered and they began to speak different languages. We don't know how far they had spread. We do know when we read the New Testament that, about Rome and other places and so forth, we can go overlook, but we also know in America that we have had the Indians here. So we would ask ourselves eventually, how did these people, how they get over here? But the thing of it is that you had this trade. And I think sometimes we forget about that trade. In other words, if they were to go from, we'll say port A, and they filled up, got all these things, and all of a sudden while they're doing that, and they know what way they're going to go back, and say, here is a fellow who has his own boat, and he's in there, and he says, well, I came all the way down from port D. Do y'all ever go to port C and D? Well, here's the one from point that's at point A says, well, we're actually from port B. We didn't know there was a port C and D, or whatever it may be in some other place. So next thing you know, that trade was going further and further and further because people were moving in these different states. Some of the chief Greek city states, and I know I'm not going to pronounce these right? Acarnania, Aetolia, Achaia, Elis, Arcadia, Messina, Sparta, Tennessee. See, I got that. Lacona, Argos, Athens, Georgia. See, Attica, Bolota. I think that's Lo and Chris. That's L-O. Let me make sure I put that L-O differently so that when I look it up, I will know what I'm doing. Chris, Euboea, and then Epirus. And there's one I mentioned when we looked on the map a while ago, Thessaly. Thessaly, Thessaly, and there are many others, but these are some of the big city states. And so that simply means to us that they had their own political system set up. They had not only but their economical, their trade, and everything of that. Where no matter where they were on the outward part of the country or on the inward part of the country, they still had all this because of the mountains and so forth. And so there was great separation, but yet there was travel among them and trade among them, it would seem. Now, the political structure of the Greek city-states were undergoing, the political structure was, wrong word, was undergoing changes during the 2 centuries of Persian supremacy. We know that the political thing does that they do change from time to time. So in the city, the political life of a community was centered. We would find that here within that city, no matter if the city, now there would be some kind of difference in reference to that of the waterfront, of coastline. But here the citizens from the countryside met, they came together and met. And here was the marketplace where they brought all of the things and that they would make and the things that they would grow, the cows and so forth, that they would butcher and sale and so forth. All this was taking place in that little country side marketplace. Sometimes, like tonight, I was eating Mr. Cow and I was eating Mr. Chicken, and because I was just eating protein, and I got kind of chuckled because I said, it must have been hard on that of Adam and Eve because they had to talk about, the rump roast and the T-bone steak and the chicken breast and things of that sort. They had to give her all these names for these different meats that they were going to eat, And I sat there and I was kind of chuckling. I said, that's kind of funny, because it didn't say eventually they didn't eat pork and stuff like that. So pork chops, hump roast and so on. And so I was just kind of funny, but there they had a marketplace. And that's where they came in. They marketed all the things, food and clothing and whatever it may have been, silk or whatever. And here were the shops of the craftsmen. And sometimes when I think about the shops, I think about, they came to the marketplace more like a yard sale type thing, or like we have in Cartersville, if you recall, Jim, downtown, we have the farmer's market. And so most likely that's about what that was. But in farmer's market, they only have that chicken. I think they have eggs, and they also have some fruits and vegetables and so forth. They sell just there, but they had everything back here that they were made in their state, their city state. But they had craftsmen, and so if you were looking for something other, if he was looking for a piece of furniture or whatever it may have been, then you could find that there. Anything that was made, if there was a new like plow that somebody had come up with, or whatever it may be, they had these shops that were set up. And here were the walls of defense. Those shops were. Most of the shops were that they were covered outward. The back part was solid, and then you had to come on the inside, and you were like inside a wall. And so, but it was set up for that part for a defense. Now, I say it would be solid back, and most likely not solid. They probably had windows back there, or some kind of a window door, and so they could open up and fire if they had to fight. But also we would find here was the government buildings and the temples. Notice I said temples. So that would mean that they were most likely idolaters. And so they had a temple for just about everything. We always think about that at Athens. And you notice there we mentioned city-states, and Athens is one of those. And so these temples, they would have, for all of their different gods, they would have these different temples for them. And so then you had the great landowners, that is the king's counselors in the prior Homeric age, assumed increasing power at the expense of the monarch. And so a lot of times they took land, and eventually they would set up the taxes and things of that sort where you had to pay. And so they had great landowners. So if they had great landowners, that means they had to have people who worked the land. And so the monarchy was thus followed by an oligarchy. And so in most cities, the king retained only his religious function. In other words, that's all he had was his religious functions. So the right to vote was confined to citizens with a certain amount of landed property. In other words, property of land. And so the right to hold office was limited to members of a few families, or at the most the wealthiest citizens of that family. Or other families. That's all they allowed to be a part of the political system and to hold office. The age qualifications further restricted the number of eligible for the magistrates and so forth. And I don't have the age of that, but they would consider, if you recall, if I'm not mistaken, that among the Jewish people, there is around 21 or so like that. Well, think about Jesus. It was 30 years old when he was 30 years old when he began, or 27 years old when he began his ministry. So, they would be older like us. We can vote when we're 18. And so they could be people you could vote, but yet there would be people that you had to be a certain age in reference to that of being able to run for office. The power was concentrated in the hands of a few. They would make all of the decisions that were going to be made. And if there were taxes, they were to let the taxes, and they would spend that money the way that they thought that it should be spent. But in the times, in the many cities of Greece, especially those near the coast, now the oligarchs were threatened by the growing demand of the rest of the citizens for a voice in government. In other words, eventually, it's just like in our country, go back in the 1920s and everything, when the women could not vote. And eventually they brought up an amendment to let women vote, and therefore they were allowed to vote. And so, things change. And so that's what happens. It seems in some ways of the freedoms that they have, because they begin to demand that everybody get to vote in the government. The small landholder resented the rule of their creditors, because basically they were small, and then you had the larger ones. And so the larger ones, say for instance, if they were growing corn and the small ones were growing corn also, the larger one could sell the corn cheaper than the smaller one. And so there was a problem there. There's resentment. So those who derived wealth from commerce and industry demanded a revision of property qualifications. So the leaders arose who offered to fulfill their demands in return for popular support in disposing of that of the ruling families. And so what you get here just seems to, hey, you come and this is what we're going to do. Or like, we hear people today, we hear politicians say, you vote for me, this is what I'm going to do. And, some of them do that. They'll go and make some type of order that has no power whatsoever to do what somebody thinks they're going to do, and they think it's going to be done. But yet we find they arose, and therefore thus the oligarch gave way to tyranny. And so tyranny in turn paved the way for democracy. And so in order to maintain power, the tyrants were compelled to make concessions to the people. In other words, this is what we are going to do. So in time, Athens developed a pure democracy. In other words, it was run by the people. And so when we think about the Grecian city-states, they were actually making strides in the political world, but also they were making strides in that of literature and sculptural and vase painting and many other things. In other words, culture. And that's the reason why that if I have the time to do this, since we'll be going streaming next week, only streaming, I don't have to come here. That gives me more time, maybe to go back in Athens and pick up some of the colorful pictures and paintings they have of the culture of that time. We did that in archaeology, in the culture study of the culture of the biblical times, and maybe we can pick those up. But in time, Athens developed this pure democracy, and they had all this, made many strides in reference to their culture. The Grecian city-states were producing some of the world's outstanding philosophers and scientists. And so we have to stop there for a moment and think about that. Since they were doing this, then did they have, libraries and things of that sort? And the answer to that is yes. They had just about everything that they needed for these people, because here you had these philosophers and you had these scientists and so forth. You had a fellow by the name of Thales. He was about 640 BC to 546 BC. And he was a Greek philosopher and scientist of Miletus. Now, you remember Miletus, if you remember that Paul called the Ephesian elders over to Miletus, and there he gave his address to them in Acts chapter 20. So here's this Thales, this philosopher and scientist, and he was one of the 7 wise men of Greece. He was recognized as the founder of the Greek geometry, astronomy, and philosophy. So when we stop and we think about him, he was a very great person, great in the sense because of the things that he tried to accomplish as that of being the person that he was. And so he was known very much over that of the area, because he was a philosopher. People would listen to him. And so he gained fame in his own day by predicting an eclipse of the sun for May the 28th, 585 BC. Now, can you imagine that? But it's because of his study of geometry and astronomy that he was able to do that. So Files lived during the time that Cyrus ruled the Persian throne. And so we'll see how that he plays a part in that. And also we had the next philosopher and mathematician was a man by the name of, let's see if I get it right, Pythagoras. 530 BC of Crotona was a Greek philosopher and mathematician. And so he traveled widely in search of wisdom. Now that reminds me, if you go back to the people of Thessalonica and Athens in Acts chapter 17, you know how they were. They was always looking for something new, as we would say. And so that's the way these people were. He associated himself disciples who were devoted reformists of political, moral, and social life. So he had a pretty good circle, as we would think of that of a circle. He is credited, though, with the discovery that the earth is a sphere. Now, I thought that's kind of interesting, 530 BC, and I gathered that a sphere, does that not mean that it was circle? Is that right, Jim? That it was circle? Well, if you recall in the book of Isaiah in 750 BC, Isaiah talks about that. And so, but then we find a man by the name of Columbus in 1492 AD that he found that the world was a circle. It was a ring. And so, so he's credited with this. But he also lived during the time that Cyrus was, as we would say, king of Persia. So now we not only have Thales, but we also have Pythagoras in the same time of that of Cyrus. And also we had Socrates. Now, Socrates is probably one of the persons that we hear a lot about. I remember when I was growing up, I can't remember what was said about, but they would say something like Socrates said, and they'd make the quote. But he was around 470 BC and 399 BC. Athens. He was a Greek philosopher and a well-known one. He became a well-known one. He developed the Socratic method, or the inquiry and instruction method, in reference to that of knowledge. And his philosophy is known through the writings of his disciple, and his disciple is Plato. And most of us have heard a lot about Plato. We've had to read some maybe of his writings. But his doctrines are the basis of the idealistic philosophy and how profoundly influenced philosophical thought through the succeeding centuries. And so he lived during the times that Artaxerxes, Longinus, and Darius II were kings in Persia. So he lived during the time that these two kings were there. And so Socrates was contemporary in time with Ezra and Nehemiah and Malachi. So that brings up three books of the Old Testament that helps us to understand some of the things that was going on among the Jewish people in Ezra and Nehemiah and Malachi. And you remember Ezra and Nehemiah, they were trying to go back and rebuild the wall, rebuild that of the temple. And so that would bring some problems. And we find that in Malachi that the Jewish people had become lax again. Therefore, they were offering offerings that should not be offered and things like that unto God. And so, but Malachi ends with a promise of a forerunner of the Messiah called John the Baptist, or John the Immerser, as we would call him. So then number 4, we had Plato, and we think about Plato, and we would think about Plato in around 427 BC to 547 BC of Athens. He was a Greek philosopher and an ardent disciple of that Socrates. Now, he stayed in Athens until Socrates' death. Now, again, that's what would happen. A lot of times, they would have their students or proteges and so forth. They'd have their students, and they would stay into the areas until the main person like Socrates would die. And then some of them would leave, but some of them would take, if they were doing instructions or being a professor, as we would say, or teaching, then they would take their place. But he traveled, Plato did. He traveled to Egypt, to Cyrene, Cilicia, and Magna Graecia. He returned to Athens in 387 BC. And so I'm going to go back up there because I got 427 BC and 947 BC, and that's not correct. That has to be 347 BC. Bob, you can't type. Get that out of line too. But anyway, he returned to Athens, and there he founded his school, a school of philosophy known as the Academy. And so that's what they would say. Even today, we find like in the military, if you're in the Navy, did you attend the academy? Or if you're in the Army, did you attend the academy? Or something like that sort. Or West Point, I think, with the Army. Did you go to West Point? Or did you go to the academy? And so that's what they did then. They would, he started a school of philosophy. And so this academy was later endowed and became in form a university, the first university in history. And so he was the author of a number of works, of which his Republics and Laws and Apology was chief. Were chief. I can't see what that word. Well, Plato was or chief. I guess that's just. Let me put something there so I'll remember to look at that. Plato was contemporary in time with the second period, or the last 70 years of that of the Persian Empire. So then we have the one who comes after that of Plato, a man by the name of Aristotle. And we've all heard of Aristotle in our lifetime of going to school and so forth, and some things about him, and also especially when we go to universities to study biblical things. But Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC of Stagiria, was a Greek philosopher. He studied under Plato. Now, again, if you stop and think about it, you go all the way back. That Plato studied under Socrates, and Aristotle studied under Plato. And so he tutored. Now, this is the thing about Aristotle, is that he tutored Alexander the Great. He taught in Athens as head of the Peripatetic school. He became famous for his works in logic, metaphysics, natural science, ethics, politics, rhetorica, and poetic. That is a long list of things for a person to become famous for, but most of us, I guess, from our studies of different things in the Bible, is that we think of him more of that of being in that of logic, because when we study logic, he is brought up numerous times. But Aristotle was contemporary in line with the second period, or the last 70 years of the Persian Empire. And so, secondly, we come up with that the rise of Alexander the Great. And so, when we think about that at the beginning of Alexander the Great, then we would find that he was the son of Philip, who was the king of that of Macedonia. And so, wait just a minute. I want to look somewhere and see if I can find what I want to look for. I figured it probably was in that book. But when you think about that of Alexander the Great, and there's a lot of things that is said in reference to him. In this other book that I have on pages 67 to 70, he talks about that of Alexander, the apostle of Hellenism, Hellenism. And so since the days of Xerxes, great power had been on the increase, and so Persia had trouble in keeping its wide empire in submission. Now, again, the bigger you get, it's hard to keep everybody in control. And so the city-states of Greece, however, never formed a united government, and the wily Persian kings were able to play off one state against another. That's what we said earlier. And so when a real union of Greek states was achieved, it was the genius of that of Philip of Macedon, not strictly speaking a Greek at all, that brought it all about. The Hellenic lead comprising all the Greek states except Sparta. And that became the instrument which gave the Persian Empire its death blow. They got everybody but one. And so Philip was able to bring his plans to fruition, but he was murdered in 336 BC. And his mantle fell on his young son, Alexander. And so, like most great leaders, Alexander represented a mass conflicting scandals or strands, and he was a Macedonian by nationality, and he dreamed of national glory at the era of Philip. And culturally, he was a Greek educated by Aristotle himself. So he carried the Iliad and the Odyssey with him on campaigns, and Alexander was thoroughly sold on the excellences of that of the Greek way of life. And so when we read about Alexander, we read a lot about how that he loved that of the Greek way of life. Matter of fact, we'll learn some things that are not so good about the Greeks. But looking back to our notes, when Philip there, as we said, he succeeded to the throne of Macedonia in 359 BC. Then when Thebes was a great power in Greece, several Macedonian nobles were taken there as hostages. And so Philip, who was heir to the throne in Macedonia, was one of the numbers. And so when Philip became king in 359 BC, he found his country, as we point out, beset by dangers from every side. But by 356 BC, about 2.5 to 3 years, he had quelled the majority of his former foes. He built the strongest army in the world at that time. And so relying on soldiers recruited on a voluntary system, and they weren't drafted, as we would say, they volunteered. He constructed a force of 40,000 men who were severely disciplined, trained to march long distance in full equipment, carrying their baggage and their food sufficient for 3 days. Now, being a combat soldier, when we went out, we carried enough from the time that we went out to that night. And that night, they resupplied us with water and sea rations and ammunition. Now, if we were to got into battle and we needed anything, we were very equipped, better equipped than Philip was. We had helicopters, and they would just bring in stuff and drop it to us. And even if we needed water, they could come in and dress up water in cans. And even though if the enemy would shoot holes in them, we still would have some water to use. And so, but they didn't have that. So they carried enough food and water for 3 days. Think about that now, 3 days. So Persia was a constant threat in Philip's day. So although, as we said, Persia made no further invasions except those to which reference had been made, it remained a constant threat to the Greek city-states. And so in addition to Persia, the Persian threat, by its mere position alone, Persia bribed and otherwise induced some of the larger city-states to take up arms on the side of the Persian Empire. The Peloponnesian in Greece was fought in the period of 457 BC to 404 BC. Now, this league, established in the 6th century, was constituted of certain autonomous city-states. The Peloponnese included Corinth, Merga, and Sparta. Okay. Now, again, we know about Corinth, that the Apostle Paul goes there in Acts chapter 18. So we're getting into some New Testament cities that we'll know about. But we find that Corinth resented the encroachment of the Athenians upon its established trade with the West. And so they did have a little problem with that. But in 457 BC, Athens besieged Aegina, Corinth's ally, in the fall of that city called Sparta, to bring the forces of the Peloponnese League against that of Athens. And like I said, and so here is Sparta. They were not brought under any control. So Persia gave Sparta assistance during this war. And so later, Sparta and Persia were engaged for the 14th year in a conflict over the Ionian cities, in which Persia expected to receive in return for the assistance which they had given Sparta during the Peloponnesian War. And so through bribery and other circumstances, Persia forced upon Greece in 386 BC a humiliating peace. She acquired, Greece did, control over the Greek cities on the Asiatic coast. Now, stop and think about that for a moment, because of the fleets in reference to battle, but also think about the commerce and trade and things of that sort that would take place on that side. She also gained the right to interfere in the affairs of the Greek communities. So they had that there done, and then the pressing problem of the age, the need for unity. And so that absorbed the attention of the Grecian philosophers, and in particular that of Plato and Socrates. And I've got to change that because that's misspelled Socrates. And so, no, that's right. I'm getting them mixed up. Isocrates, it says that 436. Let me go back right quick. I don't think that's right. And so I'm gonna go back and look. 470 BC. Okay, different person. Isocrates, I guess is the way you would say his name. Isocrates, we'll say Isocrates. That sounds good. In other words, I can pronounce that. 436 BC to 338 BC was an Athenian orator and rhetorical. And so we find he was the founder in 329 BC and the head of a school in Athens. So Isocrates urged that Greece represented the highest civilization in the world. Now, again, we know this because of our study of all things and how that history has been, that a lot of these countries were doing just that. They were growing and in reference to not only in population, but also politically and socially and culturally, and things of that sort. Just like if you stop for a moment, we know American history, how that we came over here. We landed on the Atlantic side, and all of a sudden now we all the way over in the Pacific. And so things, and you can see all the different changes that were made as they conquered the land. And so would be true there. So he was the founder of this school. He affirmed, therefore, that the city-states should cease to fight each other. And he declared that if the Grecian city-states were united in a common aim, they could meet the current menace of Persian invasion. In other words, unity. You just stop for a moment and think it's the United States of America. Our countries, our states were owned by different countries at one time. And so we became the United States of America. And so Isocrates, in his looking again around for a strong Greek leader, decided that the suitable man was Philip, king of Macedonia. And so according to Isocrates, Philip combined the high qualities of both and statesman. And he also wrote several letters to Philip explaining the urgent need for the unification of all the Greek cities. So as a lover of Athens, he begged Philip to be friendly with that of the Greek great cities. And so he believed that such an arrangement could extend the Greek culture for them. Let me change something again. I read this and study this, and I don't see some of these things, and I just don't know why. And plus, I run it through spell check. So he believed that this arrangement could extend Greek culture all over the world. Now, just stop and think about that right now when we're talking about Philip, because eventually Alexander the Great is going to conquer the world. But we had a man by the name of Demosthenes, the famous Athenian orator, disdaining Macedonia as barbaric, repudiated this suggestion. Persia placed bribes and spread propaganda in suitable quarters so that a tense situation arose between Macedonia and Greece. And that again shows us that about division. If you divide, you can divide and conquer. And so that's basically what they would do. With Philip as head, we would find war ensued. And in 338 BC, the Battle of Chaeronea made Philip master of Greece. And as head, the Greek city-states became united under a treaty known as the League Corinth. And only Sparta stood outside of for independence. Only Sparta. Now again, you have to think about that because they are not united because again they have one state that is not a part of. And so what's this one state going to do? And so Isocrates praised Philip because by treating his foes with generosity, he gained their cooperation, a more fruitful method than the destruction of their cities. So Philip marries Alypius, the sister of King Epirus, and from this union, Alexander was born in, it says 956, but that's not true. It is 356 BC. And so the following year, Cleopatra, a daughter, was born. Philip could trace his descent all the way from Hercules. See, now you always thought that Hercules was just old Greek god, but there was a person named Hercules. And Olympias was in the direct line of Achilles. She is said to have followed the cult of Dionysus, which prevailed in her country. And so that was a cult. And so there are even rumors to the effect that Olympias roamed the woods at night, joining the wild songs and dances, and indulged in this cult when his rights were due, and when the rights were due for the cult. Olympias, it is said that was impulsive and independent and very outspoken. And Olympias suffered much from Philip's frequent marital infidelities that he had, and in his habits also that he had of over drinking, which made in part explain or excuse some of her unrestrained action. And Alexander was devoted to his mother, but he never let her take, excuse me, any part in political things. So Philip divorced Olympias and married Cleopatra, a beautiful young niece of Attalus, one of Philip's generals. So Philip was assassinated by Pausanias, a youth of good birth, and Pausanias had been insulted in public by Attalus, one of Philip's generals. And so he asked Philip to obtain satisfaction for his rude conduct. So Philip tried to appease the youth by giving him a gift and retaining him in his personal service. In other words, I don't want this to happen, but so I'll do this for you. So Pausanias, seeing that he would obtain no retribution. So Attalus, being the uncle of Philip's second wife, brooded and nursed his grievance and sought the advice of a Sophius. That's a wise person that was among them. The Sophius, Ghibli, informed him that he would gain glory if he attacked some prominent man. So here it comes. The time came for the wedding of Philip's daughter, Cleopatra. And while Philip was walking ahead at the head of the procession, Pausanias rushed from the crowd of spectators and killed the king with his poignard. So Alexander the Great received a great education, as we said there, in reference to him, with that of as he was growing up, that his association with Aristotle. He received his early education in the association with that of other youths of noble birth from Leonidas, a relative of his mother. So Alexander proved to be readily persuaded, but impossible to drive. In other words, to be pushed. He was always approachable when given a reason which he could understand. Now, think about that, because again, logic. And Aristobulus, the Greek architect who accompanied him throughout the Asiatic campaigns, mentioned this quality or characteristic of Alexander. So when Alexander reached puberty, Philip was so impressed by his ability that he decided the son must have the best education possible. In other words, there were those who observed them, and therefore Philip was being observed, and since there was these acclamations that were given to him, then he needed to have the best education possible, according to Philip. So he selected Aristotle, a Greek philosopher who was, at the time, was attracting attention by his wise methods of instruction. Now, again, like I said, he's a logician, so if we were to read his work, we would see, the way that his methods work. But at 13, Alexander was sent to Mysa, where Aristotle had his school. And there he remained until he was 17. So he was there anywhere from 4 to 5 years. Later in 335 BC to 322 BC, Aristotle was head of the Peripatetic school in Athens. And so Aristotle gave Alexander much advice concerning the duties of kings, and he encouraged him to follow his father's projects in Asia. There were a number of projects that he started, and again, we find that he was conquering, but he was conquering in a different way, as other people had. So when Alexander was 14 years old, Isocrates wrote to him to tell him how delighted he was to hear the excellent reports of his love of good literature and his associates with high character and intellect people. And so he added that if Alexander continued on such lines, he would become as outstanding as his father. So until the early death of Alexander, master and pupil maintained a friendly intercourse, corresponding regular during Alexander's 11 years in the East. So at 16, Alexander was entrusted with the government of Thrace and Macedonia during the absence of his father. At 18, he managed the left arm of the army at the Battle of Charonia. And so he was so successful that after the contest, Philip embraced him, declaring that he would not be able to leave to his son a kingdom extensive enough for his exceptional gifts. Now, you think about that. Now, was that an encouragement to that of Alexander the Great to conquer the whole world? But Alexander the Great succeeded to the throne on the death of his father. Philip, as we said, was assassinated in 336 BC, just as he was beginning his preparation for the invasion of that of Persia. So the ascension of that of Alexander to the throne on the death of his father was disputed. Philip's second wife had borne a child, and many of the Macedonians considered that this infant was a legal future sovereign. Rumors spread that Olympias was so unrestrained to that of the second marriage that she was involved in the plot which led to the murder of that of Philip. Now, Olympias had tried to induce Epirus to revolt against Alexander, but Alexander countered the move when he gave his daughter as wife to the king of Epirus. And so you can see the movements that these families would take just to keep their power. Later, though, Olympias brought about the death of Cleopatra, the widow of Philip, and her infant son in order to prevent any further claim to the throne of Philip. And so we would find that Alexander remonstrated with his mother, but later he was to realize that her impetuous actions had removed from further trouble. Attalus, one of Philip's generals, claimed that his niece, Cleopatra, had the prior right to the throne because she was a Macedonian. So he urged that he should act as regent until her infant son became mature. So Attalus was at that time in Asia Minor in an attempt to gain over the Greek coastal towns. And too late, it was discovered that he had not been disloyal. But the Lyncestian brothers pled that they had a right to the crown because their family had formerly possessed Macedonia. So the promise to restore the old customs of the country and to protect the people from being involved in a fruitless war with Persia. Their claims were denied when the information was offered which proved that they had accepted money from the king of Persia. So the sympathies of the people now, because all of this, as I would say, mess that we just heard, the sympathies of the people were with Alexander. Alexander refused, as some of his friends advised, to come to the terms with his claimants to the crown. He acted with promptness, and all of who were incriminated at the assassination of that of Philip were dealt with severely. And so the news of that of Philip's death had caused a consternation throughout the country. And Greece had claimed independence with the League of Corinth. And Demosthenes delivered orations incited Athens and the other Greek cities to break their agreement with the League of Corinth. So he claimed that the treaty bound no city to any leader except that of Philip. So he further asked who could believe in the ability of the new king of Macedonia, untried, unknown, and only a boy of 20. Well, if we were to stop and go back, and we were to see the kingdom of God as we stop and think about Israel and Judah, the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you'll find that there was some youth in a lot of those kings and so forth. But Alexander realized that he was in peril on every side, that the unsubdued northern tribes from Greece itself and also from Asia. So he considered that his most important task was to consolidate his position as the head of the League of Corinth. And so he lost no time in starting out for Thessaly. And that was right up in the corner of that map that we remember, right up in the left-hand corner as we was looking at it. It's right up there. And so he was aware that the descendant troops would gather to prevent his passage through the formidable pass of Tempe. And he cut steps up the high mountain of Ossa. With this, quote, ladder of Alexander, he turned the dangerous, defiled, and descended to the plain beyond the enemy without having to strike one blow. The fine Thessalonian Berry became his possession. To the assembly of the Thessalonian Novia, he explained that he desired to be recognized as head of the League of Corinth in the place of his father. And this is what he did. He promised them that he would protect their country, and that he would carry out the invasion of Persia contemplated by his father. And thirdly, that he would share with them the booty which might come with the war with Persia. So, other words, he was making to them, he says, look, whatever we accomplish, you're going to receive a part of that, the booty. And that was one of the things, again, if you remember, that the kings of the Jewish people would do. They'd go out, and sometimes, as we try to point out when we study the last days of David's life, when we studied that, we find that that's what happens there, is that they go out and they do all this work. Those people who didn't really want to go out, they rush out there and get the booty, even though they didn't work for it. Well, here he was willing to share with them, I'm going to do this, I'm going to protect you. And not only that, we're going to carry out the invasion as my father wanted to do. And then when we beat them, we're going to give you part of the booty. And so he was a romantic touch, reminded the Thessalonians, aristocrats, that they were, like himself, descendants of the Achilles. And so that helped him a lot. And so Alexander's audience assured him that he could rely on their loyalty and assistance in furthering the unification of that of Greece. Now I'm going to stop there. I said I would not stop, but I'm going to have to stop and move around a little bit to get my legs to quit hurting. And so we'll start back. Let me get here. Wait. Let me get over here. We'll start back. Where's more? Pause recording. We'll start back in 15 minutes. Okay, Jim?
15 minutes or 7:45?
7:45.
Thank you, Bobby.
All right. I'm recording. Okay. Other student didn't join in tonight. So. There are some very difficult words when you look at some of this going back and writing. At Fairmount, teaching First and Second Samuel, some of the names in there. Now we're in First and Second King.
Yes.
Some of the names. Now you look between the Testaments and some of the names. I can understand some of them, but some of them I just don't understand why somebody would call their child some of that.
Mm-hmm.
But they do. Okay. So here it was that they were going to have this meeting. And so the outcome of this meeting was that all the adjoining states agreed to acknowledging the position of Alexander as the head of Corinth. So they went to Thermopylae. Alexander was unopposed. And so Alexander convoked the Amphictonic Council, that is a combination of the states, and was appointed head of Greece in place of Philip, his father. Now, no representatives came from Thebes or Athens. Demosthenes continued to invade against that of Alexander, but no fortifications were prepared against possible attack on that of Athens. So then we would find that that's the type of thing. Then we find out that Sparta refused to join the league. So again, when we look at the city-states, we see that ugly face again of being divided. So at Corinth, Alexander was met not only by the politicians, but also by the artists and the thinkers who desired to converse with the king, who had been a pupil of Aristotle. And so from that, they would find out how intelligent that Alexander was and the type of man that he was. So Alexander then marched to Dubni to meet the dangerous tribalian. No invasion could be made of Persia until the tribes on the frontiers of Macedonia was stopped. And so the enemy awaited Alexander at the Balkan range of the mountains. And so by skillful dispersion, this again gets you to stop and think about Alexander, because he's already dug the ladder to do what he did. And so here by his skillful dispersion of his soldiers to the left and to the right, Alexander's army escaped the rolling wagons and the carts, and the victory was Alexander's. He won the battle. And so again, showing the intellectual, logical mind of Alexander. So Alexander, his fleet, he marched there to David, and were on the opposite bank. The Crete tribe awaited him with a very strong force. So here he is, he's still fighting in that area. And so they have this strong force. His fleet was too small to cross. And so he prepared. This is what he did. Again, you can see the logic working in his mind. He prepared rafts out of hollowed logs and put skins or blowed out and so on, and crossed the passage by night. In other words, he made him a bridge line. And so at Crete, who had not expected a river crossing for several days, fled hurriedly in disarray because they weren't prepared. They thought, well, it's not going to happen now. It'll happen later. So thus rapidly, the Danabian menace was removed by Alexander. Now, you'll notice that he's using his mind. That's the thing. He's doing this from a logical standpoint. And most likely, we've had those people in our military that has looked at the logic of that of Alexander, and going back and reading about Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. But Alexander turned now to the south because he had to deal with two Illyrian armies that had invaded Macedonia and captured Peline. And so this was an important western fortress. So he hurriedly moved his troops to 200-mile distance before they could be attacked. And so when his army was cut off from rations, he ingeniously confused the enemy by army drillings up and down and around in open view. And so suddenly the Phoenix charged and the Peline were captured. So again, noticing what he was doing, I mean, he was how he had prepared himself to take these places. So during the delay caused by the northern campaign, rumors spread that Alexander had been killed. And so Demosthenes produced a witness who was certain that Alexander had been wounded and could not recover. And so Thebes claimed independence. So other Greek cities promised to aid her against Macedonian supremacy. Alexander realized the seriousness import of such news, and so choosing to rank over the high hills and hurriedly moved his array, and within a fortnight, before anyone had heard of his approach, he encamped some 6 miles distance within Thebes. And the rapidity of the march struck Athens also. I don't know what that word, I can't remember what that word's supposed to be, so we'll just have to mark that one. I didn't tell y'all how I did this. I have an old manuscript of
Looks like it would be disarray, Bobby.
disarray. Yeah. Well, let me see. And I have to, what I do in reference to them is that I scan them. And then after I scan them, I have to go back and retype them. And so sometimes, because I use two different spelling things to check the grammar and all of that, I miss things. And so as I type them, sometimes I miss them. So Athens called the troops that she had sent to aid Thebes. And so she decided to await the results. And so Thebes found that all her promised allies had vanished. Now, she feared that the Procreans and the Plataeans and the other Boeotians had ruled with severity would exceed that of Alexander. And so Alexander was loth to fight Thebes. Twice Thebes had defeated Sparta. And remember, Sparta was the one that did not join. And so Alexander postponed the attack and awaited an apology for the murder of the two of his officers. And so Thebes refused to apologize. And so every conciliatory approach that Alexander made was rejected. So Alexander prepared to attack the city. No one for a moment believed that so young a general could win a contest with Thebes. Perdiccas found a weakly guarded position in the wall. And though gravely wounded, Perdiccas drove the Thebans to the temple of Hercules. And the Cadmean garrison swept down to aid them, and a terrible slaughter ensued. So the Thebanical fled, the Theban cavalry fled early in the combat as they were powerless in the city. So at nightfall, a halt to the struggle was called. Members of the League of Corinth who had joined Alexander's forces were summoned to a conference and were told that as sufferers under the cruelty of Thebes, they had the right to declare the punishment. So they demanded that the city should be razed to the ground. Alexander unwillingly consented on condition that the house of Pindar, the poet, and the temple should be spared. So record states that the ruins was carried out by the Boeotians and others who had long groaned under Thebes' dominion. So the devastation of Thebes made a profound impression upon Alexander. And the memory of the toil of death and slavery troubled his conscience for many years. Now remember, he's about 30 years old. So in Asia, when the Theban mercenaries were taken prisoners, special leniency was also shown toward them. And terrible as things had been, the price Thebes paid, the results of her fate was that all other cities hastened to submit to Alexander. So Alexander showed the greatest of clemency to all. Athens was afraid of what might happen to her, but he granted clemency. Alexander loved Athens, and as we said, we come over to the New Testament, and we can see the influence of that culture there. And he made no demands except that 9 men invade against him should be delivered up as hostages. And Demosthenes was one of those 9 men. After some discussion, Alexander was persuaded to modify his terms, and he exacted that only 1 man, Charidemus, should be exiled. Charidemus escaped to Persia and joined with Darius. And so Alexander, at the age of 20, had within 1 year made himself master. And I said 30, but 20, very young. And had within 1 year made himself master of Greece. And so the road now seems clear to prepare for the expedition to that of Asia. But then it brings us to our third part of our outline, that we shall consider why we need a detailed introduction to the Grecian states and to the rise of that of Alexander the Great. In other words, there's reasons why these events are important for us to know, to understand what went on between that of New Testament. So that carries us to chapter 11 and 12 of the book of Daniel. And we're going to look at those. And I'm not one that likes to read a long passage, but we're going to have to read this because of what it says and how that it will help us to see some things about between that of the Testaments, the history and so forth, and the events that took place. Now, Alexander the Great and his dominion marked the beginning of a new era, a broad division of history that was calculated to affect deeply God's people. And notice all along, we haven't really talked about God's people, but Daniel prophesied of this era. Now, I want you, if you have your Old Testament, and I have mine, plus I have my glasses. And if you turn over to Daniel chapter 11, I'm one that usually likes just to refer to passages, but I was talking earlier to a brother, and I was telling him how hard it is to sit here and read long chapters, but yet it seems that for us to hear that this is the best thing for us to do is to read these 2 chapters, Daniel chapter 11 and Daniel chapter 12.
because Daniel prophesied of this era. That is what we're going to talk about. He begins in chapter 11. He says, and also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now while I show thee the truth, behold, there shall stand up yet three kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, though his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And a mighty king shall stand up, and shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, shall be divided into four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion, while he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, and have dominion of his dominion shall be a great dominion. And in the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. But she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand nor his arm, but she shall be given up, and they that brought her, and he that begot her, and he that strengthened her in these times. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up, his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail, and shall also carry captives into Egypt, their gods, with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the north. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own hand, but his son shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up even to his fortress. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight with him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he have given away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, but he shall not be strengthened by you. For the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south, against the robbers. Let me find out where I'm supposed to be. Robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fail. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities, and the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him. And he shall stand in the glorious land which by his hand shall be consumed. He shall also set his face to enter with the strength of the whole kingdom, and upright ones with him. Thus shall he do, and he shall give him the daughter of women, corrupt in her, but she shall not stand on the other side, neither be with him, before him. After this shall he turn his face unto the isles, and shall take many, but a prince far for his own behalf shall cause the reproach offered by him to cease. Without his own reproach he shall cause it to turn upon him. Then he shall turn his face toward the fort of his own land, but he shall stumble and fall and not be found. Then shall stand up in his estate a raiser of taxes and the glory of kingdom, but within few days he shall destroy, neither in anger nor in battle, and his estate shall stand up a vile person, to whom they shall not give the honor of the kingdom, but he shall come in peaceably and obtain the kingdom by flatteries. And with the arms of a flood shall they be overflown from before him, and shall be broken, he also the prince of the covenant. And after the league made him with him, he shall work deceitfully, for he shall come up and shall become strong with a small people. He shall enter peacefully, even upon the flattest places of the province, and he shall do that which his fathers had not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey and spoil and the riches. Yea, he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. And he shall stir up his power and his courage against the king of the south, and with a great army. And the king of the south shall be stirred up to battle, and with this great and mighty army he shall not stand, for they shall forecast devices against him. Yea, they that feed the portion of his meat shall destroy him, and his army shall overflow, and many shall fall down slain. And both these kings' hearts shall do mischief, and shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper, for yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Then shall he return into his land with great riches, and his heart shall be against the holy covenant, and he shall do exploits and return to his own land, and at the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former as the latter. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. So shall he do. He shall even return and have intelligence with them that forsake the holy covenant. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. And such as do weakly against the covenant shall be corrupt by flatteries, but the people that do know that their God shall be strong and do exploits. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by the flame, by captivity, and by spoil many days. Now when they shall fall, they shall be holden with a little help, but many shall cleave to them with flatteries. And some of them understanding shall fall, to try them and to purge and to make them a white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself among every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper until the indignation be accomplished, for that it is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God, the American Standard says gods there, of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall not magnify himself above all, but in his estate shall be honored the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall be honored with gold and silver, and with the precious stones and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strong host with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And at the time, at the end, shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall enter into countries and shall overflow and pass over. And he shall enter into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. But these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom and Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver, and over the precious things of Egypt. And the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas in the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. And at that time shall Micah stand up, and the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that same time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found and written in the book. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, and some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting life. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many righteousness as stars forever and ever. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words, seal the book, even to the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall be increased. Then I, Daniel, looked, and behold, there stood other two, the one on this side and the bank of the river, and the other on the other side of the bank of the river. And one said to the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? And I heard the man clothed in linen, which was upon the waters of the river, when he held up his right hand and his left hand unto heaven, and sware by him that liveth forever, that it shall be for a time and times and a half, and when he shall have accomplished to scatter the power of the holy people, all these things shall be finished. And I heard, but I understood not. Then said I, O my Lord, what shall be the end of these things? And he says, go thy way, Daniel, for the words are closed up and sealed to the time of the end. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall be wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. And from the time that the daily sacrifice shall be taken away, and the abomination that maketh desolate set up, there shall be 1,290 days. And blessed is he that waiteth and commandeth, cometh to the 1,305 days. But go thy way till the end be, for thou shalt rest and stand in thy lot at the end of the days. So he's talking there, again, speaking to that of Daniel. So Daniel has prophesied in reference to what's going to take place. And so we have to see this because, again, we're going to talk about the Grecian states and this rise of that of Alexander the Great. So Daniel in chapters 11 and 12 comprise the last recorded communication that was actually made to that of Daniel. We find that in Barnes' notes, I got to move my Bible. I don't want to mess up the computer. Barnes' notes, he says the revelation which is made in these two chapters not only embrace a large portion of history of interest to the Jewish people of ancient times and designed to give instruction as to the important events that should pertain to their nation, but also in its progress alludes to important periods in the future as marking decisive eras in the world's history and contains hints as to what will occur down to the end of all times. And so Daniel is prophesying there, and we have to remember, if we were to go to the New Testament right quickly, there's a passage in Luke chapter 24, verse 44, that Jesus there says, the things concerning me that are written in the law of Moses and the prophets and in the Psalms concerning me have been fulfilled. So we would have to remember that when we think about what Daniel is saying. So here it is, the vision takes place in the year of Cyrus. In Daniel chapter 10 and in verse 1, let me pull my Bible over here now so I can, well, I hope I can. There you go. In Daniel chapter 10 and in verse 1, it says there, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belteshazzar, and the things was true. But the time upon it was long, and he understood the thing and had understanding of the vision. And so here it was that in Daniel chapter 10 and verse 1 there, the vision took place in the 3rd year of Cyrus. Now Darius, Daniel chapter 11 and verse 1, and Darius, Daniel chapter 5 and verse 35, not Darius Hystaspes of 521 BC to 486 BC, okay? You have to understand that. So the vision though it was received in the 3rd year of Cyrus, moves back to Darius and the very beginning of the Persian period in Babylon. So when he goes back there, beginning chapter 11, verses 1 through 4, also I, in the 1st year of Darius the Mede. Now notice he says Darius the Mede. There is a book on Darius the Mede. So we're talking about the Darius of Daniel 11 is the Darius of Daniel chapter 5 and verse 35. He says, and now whom I showed thee the truth, behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the 4th shall be rich, far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of the Grecia. And a mighty king shall stand up, and that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up in his kingdom, his kingdom shall be broken, and he shall be divided toward the 4 winds of the heaven. He says, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. And so here, Daniel 11 and verse 1, there we're talking about the Darius. The vision, though, received in the 3rd year of that of Cyrus, so it moves back to Darius in the very beginning of the Persian period in Babylon. That's what Daniel is prophesying. So it was that the year that Daniel offered his solemn prayer as recorded in chapter 9 of the book of Daniel. Now, we're not going to go over now and read the whole book of chapter 9, but over in chapter 9 and down in verse 2, it was in that year that according to the time predicted by Jeremiah, Daniel 9 and verse 2, the captivity would terminate. He says there, in the 1st year of his reign, I, Daniel, understood by books the number of the years whereof the word of the Lord came to Jerusalem. To Jeremiah the prophet, that he would accomplish 70 years in the desolations of Jerusalem. That's from Jeremiah 25, verses 11 and 12. And so the captivity would terminate. So it was in that year that an influence from above led the mind I gotta do something there. The mind of that of the king, the Persian king, about restoration of the captured period people. Their 70 years was up. They were supposed to be go over to 70 years captivity. Those 70 years are up, and things need to be changed according to God, what God said. So Daniel mentions that 3 kings in Persia would stand up. That is, they would be 3 kings in Persia before the 4th, which he mentions. The angel does not say there will be any afterward. He just talks about the 4. Now, the angel evidently designed to touch on the great leading events respecting the Persian Empire, so far as they could affect the Hebrew people, and so far as they would constitute a prominent points in the history of the world. Now, we looked in reference to that of the things that were pertaining to the world around the Hebrew people, but now we're seeing what Daniel has said in reference to that of the Hebrew people, what's going on around them and how it is affecting them. So the angel, he does not therefore go into all the details, but nor does he mention all the kings that would reign. The 3 kings that he talks about here are the 3 that we call, they're called by the name of Cambas, I always think of the Smurfs when I think of this name. Smeardis, S-M-E-R, Smeardis and Darius Hystaspes. These are the ones he refers to. Now, the 4th king is Xerxes. And again, there's questions that comes up. He was, and we saw this according to what we've already seen in reference to what history reveals to us, that he was for richer than he was more richer or far. He was richer. I'm gonna take the word "for" out. He was richer. He was richer than they all. That is, Xerxes was. Getting tired. You know what I mean? Xerxes was, and so Cyrus had collected a vast amount of wealth by the conquest of Lydia, and we'll look at the, if you look at the map again, and the subjugation of its rich king of Croesus. So now Cambius increased the wealth that he inherited from Cyrus by his victories in the south and by his plundering the temples wherever he went. Now notice I said temples, so that would mean idolatrous temples, and so they would take all the gold and the silver and the bronze, all those types of things that were dedicated to them. Therefore, they would gain all those riches. So the wealth was further increased by the conquest of Darius Hystaspes, and all of a sudden by his heavy taxes on the people. And so all this vast wealth was inherited by Xerxes. And so he was a very wealthy leader. By Xerxes' strength and by his riches, the Bible says, or Daniel points out, it's pointed out to Daniel, he would stir up all the realm of Greece. There were several kings of Persia after Xerxes. Still, these are not enumerated because the real ground of the invasion of Persia by Alexander the Great did not occur in their reign. But it was the invasion of Greece by Xerxes. So Xerxes was enabled by his great wealth to collect and to equip one of the largest armies ever assembled. There probably is in history about what these people get. And I do know, again, like the booty, they get help with the booty. But I often wonder, when they, like Xerxes, when he gathers all these people together from all these different places, is it that they have a payroll? Do they pay these people? Like we have the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force, and that other place, Marines, and we all, and Coast Guard, and Merchant Marines back in World War II, and we all got paid according to rank. Well, I just wonder about in reference to this. Like I said, I know they're going to take part of the booty when they collect that. Was that all the pay that they got? But see, he had great wealth. He had collected that. He is able to equip one of the largest armies. In other words, he could have all these things made. And so you would find people making all the implements that they needed of war. And therefore that would be paid by by Xerxes. And so the wealth would be spread around, and since they had a great economy. And so he spent 4 years, now 4 years in preparing for the expedition. And the army was gathered out of all parts of Xerxes' vast empire. In other words, it wasn't just people, as we would say, from Georgia, and then people from Washington, then people from Maryland. No, it was from every place that that was in his empire. Everybody came together. Now, that's what they would call unity, because they're going to be together. And if they're going to be able to gather part of the booty, and they'll take the booty and divide among themselves, then that would be good for everybody. Everybody would get about the same amount. And so Herodias estimated that the army in all could not have been less than 5 million. That is just staggering to me. 5 million soldiers. And how many people live in the state of Georgia? 4 million? About 4 million? Man, that's a lot of people. I mean, I think 1 million of those comes from Cartersville to Atlanta every day that I've been with the traffic. So can you just imagine, see, that here it was, 5 million. So the mighty king, according to verses 3 and 4 of chapter 11, the mighty king, he says there, notice what he says, he says, shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion, which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. Now, what's that? So the mighty king who would stand up there is Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great is going to rule with great dominion. And so the whole world except Greece was supposed to be subject to that of the power of Persia. The leading and the avowed purpose of Xerxes invading Greece was to have the earth under Persians' control. Now we got to change. This was one of the biggest problems that I had when I took this from a PDF and made it a Word document. Anything with apostrophe S became a TS. And so when I see it, I automatically know what to do. But when Alexander the Great, he actually conquered that of Persia, it was supposed that he had subdued the world. When Alexander the Great stood up and ruled, now there's another time, stood up, apostrophe, a T apostrophe, but I don't know. Stood up or ruled, that's the way I'm going to leave it. I'll just highlight it and I can look on the original. His kingdom was broken. When he stood up, his kingdom was broken. Now, when Alexander was in the height and glory of his authority and power, as one who had actually subdued the whole world, his kingdom was broken by his death. You know, he died at a very young age. The sense of that the empire would not gradually diminish and decay, but that Alexander's sudden death would affect the rending of the kingdom into 4 parts. Now, Daniel there is pointing that out to us back again in chapter 11 and in verse 4. He says, for his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those, as those that of him. And so no one of Alexander's successors ruled according to his dominion which he ruled. No ruler among his successors ever obtained as wide as a dominion as that of Alexander the Great did. And that's the reason why most of the time we hear people say he conquered the whole world. Well, it is supposed that he did. Because again, as we have pointed out, that he did go about doing a lot of things. But this is what is said after he conquered that of Persia. That he was supposed to have subdued the whole world. We find that Alexander's kingdom was divided to the 4 winds of heaven and did not pass to his posterity. And so we now are prepared to take an overall look at Alexander's conquest of that of Persia. Now, Alexander crossed the Hellespont. I hope I'm saying that right. Hellespont in 334 BC to invade and to conquer that of Persia. Now, a close fight ensued between Alexander's army and Darius III at the river Granicus. Alexander won the battle. Darius III did not take the expedition seriously. The army he sent consisted of an army of Persian cavalry, Greek mercenaries, and native troops. In other words, they were not well trained and well maintained troops. So the Greek cities of Asia Minor were next taken and liberated in many instances against their will. The next serious challenge to Alexander's conquest was at the Cilician gates at Issail. Now Darius advanced with his Persian army. The Persians fell back before Alexander, and Damascus were taken. The Phoenician cities, except for Tyre, and surrendered and were occupied. So then on 2 occasions, Darius III offered to negotiate with Alexander. So this, sit down and talk about this. And so he offered Alexander territory, a large sum of money, and a hand of his daughter in return for his family who had been taken captive at the fall of Damascus. But Alexander refused, having already decided upon a policy of world conquest. So Tyre was next to fall, having resisted Alexander for some 7 months. Then Gaza, after a 2-month siege failed, Alexander was wounded during the battle. Now Alexander then marched, now this according to that of Josephus, book 11, chapter 8, sections 2 through 70. I was thought about bringing that in and reading all of that, but that's a long reading. But Alexander marched to Jerusalem by Judah, the high priest, as well as the people. Now, while Tyre was under siege, Alexander sent an epistle into the Jewish high priest to send him some auxiliaries and to supply his army with provisions, and that he should never repent of doing so. Now, Judah, as I said, Judah, I'll go with Judah, the high priest replied that he had given his oath to Darius not to bear arms against him, and he said that he would not transgress this while Darius was in the land of the living. Now, why would he say something like that? In the land of the living. Alexander, quote, was very angry, and he threatened that he would make an expedition against the Jewish high priest and through him teach all men to whom they must keep their oaths. Now, this is what Josephus is telling us. When Alexander had taken Gaza, he made haste to go up to Jerusalem. Judah, the high priest, was in agony and under that of terror, not knowing how he should meet the Macedonians. So Judah ordained that the people should join him in his supplications and offering sacrifices unto that of God. And so Josephus goes on and says, whereupon God warned Judah in a dream that he should take courage and adore the city and open the gates, that the rest should appear in white garments, but that he and the priest should meet the king in the habits proper to their order without the dread of any ill consequences. And Judah went out in procession with the priests and with the multitude of citizens, Josephus says. Now to the charting of the Phoenicians and the Chaldeans who expected to have opportunity to plunder the city. In other words, after Alexander did what he did, then these Phoenicians and Chaldeans were going to go in and take everything they possibly could. So Alexander approached by himself and first saluted the high priest. Now, I want to stop there because when you talk about that of the Phoenicians and the Chaldeans, it seems here that because of Alexander is conquering, that as he is conquered and so forth, that he has people like the Phoenicians and the Chaldeans who he has made a promise to, or said, well, when we take this city, you'll be able to go there and you'll be able to plunder that city. Whatever you get is yours. And now when they would go through and do, his army would get everything that they possibly could carry with them, food and stuff of that sort. But Alexander, in justification for his seemly adoration for the high priest, declared, I saw this very person in a dream, in this very habit when I was at Dios in Macedonia. Alexander came to the city, and when he went into the temple, he offered sacrifices to God, capital G, according to the high priest's directions. And that is a quote again from that of Josephus. Now, he magnificently treated both the high priest and the priests, all the priests. The book of Daniel, though, was shown him, according to what they say, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the emperor or the empire of Persia, and he supposed that himself was the person intended, and he was glad and dismissed a multitude for the present. So he notice there the assumption that he has made that he is the one that is going to destroy the empire of the Persians.
because now they're reading from that of the book of Daniel. They're reading the same place where we just read chapters 11 and chapters 12. So the next day, Alexander called Judah and the priests and bid them ask what favors they pleased of him. So whereupon the high priest desired that they might enjoy the laws of their forefathers and might pay no tribute on the 7th year. Now again, that 7th year is a Sabbath, a sabbatical year, 7th year, the idea. So Alexander the Great granted all they desired. Now Judah and the priests entreated Alexander that he would permit the Jews in Babylon and Media to enjoy their own laws also, and Alexander willingly promised to do hereafter what they desired. So many of the Jews were ready to accompany Alexander in his wars, and according to what I read, this material is taken from Josephus, is regarded by some people as unhistorical. We don't know if that is the case or not, because this is history and we're reading what the historian has written. But Sanballat, over in the book of Josephus, book, that should be book 11, take it like that, chapter 8, sections 2 through 7, the Egyptians welcome Alexander as a deliverer. So when he went there, can't get my computer to move, as that of deliverer. And so Alexander entered the temple of Ammon, where the oracles announced that Alexander was the son of Ammon and that he would conquer the world. The administration of Egypt was recognized or reorganized, and the Egyptians were given a large share of the country of the control of their country. And so the new city of Alexandria was the enduring monument to that of the Macedonian conquest of that of Egypt. It replaced Eri. Let me see here. It replaced Tyre, should be. It replaced Tyre as a commercial metropolis on the Eastern Mediterranean. So the Jewish colonists were encouraged to settle now in Alexandria. And we'll find a lot of things about Alexandria when we study some other things about the different cities. But we find that their presence in Alexandria was to have an important bearing on the subsequent history of Judaism and that of Christianity. For instance, in 331 BC, Alexander retraced his steps northward through Palestine and Syria. But on the Mesopotamian plain at Arbela, in the Battle of, I was about to say Guatemala, it looks like it, Gamela, Alexander maneuvered and defeated the grand army of Darius. And notice what I said, he outmoved. So again, there goes some of that Aristotle logic, I guess. Alexander marched on until he had taken the entire territory of Persia. The capitals of Persia Empire, Babylon, Susa, Persepolis, and Ecbatana were successively occupied. So with the conquest of Persia behind him, Alexander continued his eastern conquest. Now, Bactria and Sogdiana, they're Russian Turkestan, were his next conquest. And this conquest cost him, though. It cost him 3 years of bitter fighting. 3 years. Well, that's not long compared to some of the wars we fought, still fight. As a gesture of reconciliation, Alexandria the Great married Roxana, a Bactrian princess. And Punjab, and when I saw that, the region of India, that's what I thought when I said Punjab, but he has to be from India. Well, he was. He was the limit of Alexander's request. That's as far as he went. His army refused to travel any further. And I could understand that. You know, look how long they've already fought just right there that we talk about in reference to that of the conquest of Bactria and Sogdiana, that he fought there for 3 years. You know, it's time sometimes to go home. You know, we stop sometimes to think about, because we see movies been made about the Civil War and how things took place in the Civil War. You know, Johnny come marching home. They were ready to go home. They're tired of fighting. And so we would find that they simply did not want to go any further. So some unique contributions of Alexander the Great consist of, number one, Alexander encouraged the merging of society, both socially and commercially. In other words, a combining of all of that. He also encouraged intermarriage with the Persians. Now, that was good among the Gentile, as we call it, the Gentile world.
but that was not good in reference to that of the Jewish people. So we're going to find in between the testaments that the Jewish people also intermarried. And when we get into the study of the Maccabees. And so his army, as we said, refused to go on. Then we find that number 3, he diffused the Grecian culture and religion and philosophy among the conquered people. And so you can imagine by doing so how they picked up on some of the things that the Grecians were doing. And not only that, but also some of their idolatry and also some of their philosophy. And we'll find that the Apostle Paul will quote some of those poets and so forth in the New Testament. He so diffused the Greek language among the nation that it became a high universal language. Now, do you get the picture? Here is the picture. Other words, for the coming of the kingdom that Daniel has talked about, that Joel has talked about, that Micah has talked about, that Isaiah has talked about, there are certain things that have got to be in order. And one of those things is everybody's got to speak the same language, back all the way back to the Tower of Babel. And so here it is, he is speaking because he's going everywhere and he speaks, and all of his army people speak Greek. Now, I went to Vietnam in September 67, stayed to September 68. And I was amazed when I got there that they're small children. They're smaller children. When we say 4 or 5 years old, all the way up to about 10, 11 years old, they could speak English. Now, some of it wasn't very nice because some GI didn't teach them nice words. They call cuss words. But they were taught they could speak. And I was even more surprised when I went over into Latvia, Riga, Latvia, to do some mission work, that we had this little boy. He was 12 years old and he could speak English just like I could. I mean, he had it slants, like he would say, Bobby, something of that sort. But the thing is, you could understand what he said. You could tell him what you wanted. I said, I want me one of them big old Russian hats. Why, he went and bought me one and I paid him for it. I said, I want this and I want that. And he would go get it. He understood what we wanted, and we carried on conversation. We'd go eat and we'd get him to order for us because he could order in that of Latin and Russian. And we was Americans, and they didn't understand us. But it's amazing to me. So here, he so diffused the Greek language, what we would call the Koine Greek language. Eventually, we find the Greek language among the nations that it became a nigh universal language. This contribution greatly facilitated the spread of the gospel. Some 3 centuries later, when we come to that of the New Testament, the main language is the Koine Greek. Now, when we say that, we want everybody to understand the Koine Greek became the language of the people at the time for the gospel, but the Koine Greek language became a dead language. And that just simply means that since it became a dead language, the meanings died with the word. In other words, I always use the word baptizo. We have transliterated that, say baptized, but it literally means to dip, to plunge, to immerse. And so that word will always mean immerse. Now we can turn to Webster and it can say that it means to sprinkle, to pour, or to immerse. No, it means to immerse because it's a dead language. We look at the word ecclesia. It's the word that we translate in the King James Bible as the word as the word assembly, but mostly to the word church. But it should be translated because of the word congregation would be a better word, it seems, when you look at it. And so, but we understand that it's a dead language. It don't change its meaning. And so that was one of the points in reference to the plan of God for the coming of the kingdom of God, that the kingdom was going to come, but certain things had to be in order for the kingdom to come. So here's one of those that's beginning. So Alexander died at an early age. He was 33 years old. His kingdom was divided among his generals. And so Alexander died at the age of 33. In histories of history, let me do this. In histories of the world, and I'm going to underline that because I ain't going to underline it. I don't like moving around. I'm going to do it like that. That's a book. There is an interesting account of his life in volume 4, pages 390 and 391. I don't have that book. I may try to find it, and if I do, or maybe I can find it and download it, and then we can come back and just look at this brief the account of that life, see all the things that he actually did. He had reigned 12 2/3 years as king. He left no heir. He was killed. His reputed son, Hercules, had been slain sometime before. The empire was held in trust by his generals for an unborn son by Roxana. And one of the successors, Cassander, murdered Roxana and her son. The kingdom was divided into 4 parts among his generals, namely, and Antigonus occupied the country of the Mediterranean to the Central Asia. Cassander ruled Macedonia. Ptolemy, oh, who in the world is that? We're going to talk about the Ptolemies. Ptolemy Legate ruled Egypt and southern Syria. And Lysimachus ruled Thrace. Now, we're going to stop there because we don't have about 5 minutes. And I'm going to put this, blue line right there. And the reason the blue line right there is because that tells me that's where we're going to start. And there's a reason that we're going to start there is because we want to read Daniel chapter 8, verses 5 through 8, and talk a little about the great horn and some other things that we can have. And we'll try to finish, we will finish number 5 and number 5 and start with number 4 and start with number 5, Lord willing, next Thursday. And next Thursday I'll be at home. We won't be meeting here because we have no students inside our classroom. I'll have all streaming. So, any question or comment? Well, I enjoyed.
That was neat, Bobby. That was interesting as all get out.
Yeah. Well, I wish what I had done, and I was thinking this when I was reading Daniel chapter 11 and 12. I said, what I should have done is in there it says, and I in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood, Daniel there. Then when he starts talking about the different kings, put in, the name there of Alexander. And that way, if you were to do your Bible that way, but if we ever study the book of Daniel, that's what we'll do. We can insert somewhere in my Bible, in the first of this of Daniel here, I have all kinds of notes, but I never did translate or transfer the other notes in the first Bible I used when I went through graduate school. And so I don't have those in this Bible. I may look at my old Bible and bring it and see if I can read the writing that's so many years old, 40 years old. So,
Yeah.
Okay. Y'all have a good night. God bless.
Thanks, Bobby. Be careful going home.
I'll do it. God bless.